Welcome.
Welcome to the Everything Podcast. I am your host, Chuck Manity. And in today's episode, we are going to be continuing with Love, Death and Robots, Season 1, Episode 9. This episode is called The Dump. It's aired on March 15th, 2019 and has a runtime of 11 minutes. This got a relatively okay score on IMDb. It was 6.3 out of 10 with 16,000 votes or reviews. And the synopsis is Ugly Dave calls the garbage dump home, and he's not about to let some city slicker take it away from him. So the directors for this was Gabriella Piniccioli, Javier Recio Gracia. The writers were Joe R. Lansdale, Philip Gillette and Tim Miller. And then the stars of the show was Nolan North as Ugly Dave, Andre, that's a surname, Sogliuzzo, Andre Sogliuzzo, let's say that. He speaks as Pearly, and Gary Cole is the inspector. So, just some trivia. The plot is based on a short story written by Joe R. Lansdale called The Dump. And some of the goofs is Ugly Dave shot 3 times with his double-barreled shotgun, supposed to have 2 shots without reloading. So there you go, that was a bit of an oopsie. But anyway, without any further ado, let's get right into it. So it opens up with the Netflix logo, followed by the title sequence. It opens up with the under part of a vehicle pulling up somewhere, and that somewhere is the dump yard. The gentleman is having a conversation. He seems to be a person in the line of evicting people or something to that effect. And he then, as he climbs out the car, stands on a dead possum and is really grossed out by his surroundings immediately. There's a small narration from Ugly Dave, and he makes mention of his castle, or his home being his castle, and you need to protect it pretty much with any which way necessary. The inspector is looking around, trying to peer through to try to get a hold of somebody on the property. He looks through the window, doesn't see anyone, but sees some sort of doll. As he looks to his right, lo and behold, Ugly Dave greets him with his double-barrel shotgun. The inspector then introduces himself to Ugly Dave. Dave tells they're sitting on 2 chairs just in front of the main property, surrounded by a ton of garbage. And Ugly Dave makes mention that he stayed there for 20 years, and he said that some silly new sanitation law that has come to pass doesn't mean anything to him. And he takes the clipboard and then throws it to the floor or the feet of the inspector. Ugly Dave then turns around and calls out, "Otto, Otto!" And then he always says Otto's always scrounging around for food. He then says to the inspector that he'd like to have a beer, give him a sob story about him and Otto, and if he still wants Ugly Dave and Otto to leave, then he'll sign the dotted line. The response of the inspector is he said he didn't care, he doesn't care about drunken ramblings, he just wants to get to the point and get Ugly Dave and Otto out. So Ugly Dave tries to light a cigarette, which doesn't go well. His lighter doesn't work. The inspector then lights his lighter at the exact same time. His works. He looks at Ugly Dave, obviously with no intention of sharing his lighter, puts it in his top pocket. Then Dave commences his story talking about him and Pearlie obviously having a night of fun and drinking. Yeah, so the conversation strikes off with, it obviously switches over to the party of himself and Pearlie. And they are sitting having a few drinks. They're talking, Pearlie saying to Ugly Dave that he needs to get out into the world, and Ugly Dave says everything that's out in the world that he needs always ends up in the dump. So then Pearlie then asks him, what about the woman? And then he says, oh no, there's one right there. And then you see a doll of some sort, and then Pearlie apologizes to her. He goes, sorry Betty. Pearlie then finds himself needing the loo, obviously with a copious amount of alcohol he's been drinking. So he takes a walk within the dump and then starts to have a pee. He then sees a few bottles and cans rolling towards him and hears a few clonking noises going on in the dump, I beg your pardon. And he sees a whole bunch of rubbish flying in front of him from what looks like straight in front of him, but just around a corner, with a huge piece of metal then eventually flying through and landing on one of the dump pieces. But he can't see what is throwing or flinging the rubbish into the air. He then whips out his gun and points his gun at whatever he is now afraid of at this point, because whatever it is that is throwing the rubbish and through that piece of metal can't be small or weak. It then goes through to a shot of Ugly Dave as he's sitting at the fire that they have, obviously where they were sitting and drinking. Then Ugly Dave then hears gunshots going off, and then he says, hey, stop shooting at the rats. He says the rats are great company, so he doesn't want Pearlie to shoot at the rats. Pearlie comes running out of the dump, or the center of the dump, and he's got his trousers around his knees. He's completely freaked out, and he's shouting at Ugly Dave that they have to get the hell out of Dodge, because whatever it is coming. So both Pearlie and Ugly Dave are by the fire with their guns. Ugly Dave with his double barrel, and Pearlie with just a normal handgun. Pieces of what looks like kind of goo just pop out of the shadows and grab onto Pearlie, dragging him back into the shadows. He's holding onto Ugly Dave's shotgun in the hope that maybe Dave can save his life. As you see Pearlie going into the shadows, you just hear screaming and clunking of metal. Then what you see coming out of the shadows looks like a whole huge melting pot of what looks like nuclear spots of green and the rubbish. So basically it's all glued together with what looks like little shining green spots. Probably how this thing was made in the first place, if you think about it. Oh, nuclear waste and a whole bunch of metal and rubbish and all the stuff in the garbage dump sort of comes together and makes this monster. You see Pearlie's legs sticking out of the monster's mouth, and then the monster just sort of chugs its head back to swallow Pearlie completely. Ugly Dave then fires his shotgun at the monster, and it goes to a shot where you see the hole through the monster, and that hole completely repairs itself. Dave is shouting at the monster to give his friend back, because obviously Pearlie's now been eaten by this monster. Ugly Dave then gets into his forklift and then starts pursuing the monster in his forklift. Ugly Dave then catches the monster, rams the forklift into it through its middle, and then rams that monster into a fence, and then a fight ensues between the monster and then Ugly Dave and his forklift. Ugly Dave then starts ripping the monster apart with the forklift, but then hears a dog howling from within the monster and then stops his forklift. So then you get a bit of a backstory about the monster. It said that it wasn't just made by the garbage, it basically becomes what it eats and lives off of. So the little puppy that was in it, or that popped its head out, that's kind of how it took its basic form, was with this dog, the first sort of living thing it ate. And then obviously with regards to Pearlie, it's going to obviously take on some of his personality as well. And he then immediately goes back to the scene with Ugly Dave and the inspector. The inspector takes no interest in his story as he ends the story. Obviously when you've now panned back to, not panned back, but the shot going to where the conversation or the story was happening in the first place. The inspector clearly shows no interest in the story. He's calling Pearly curly and all sorts of disrespectful things. So the inspector says he's going to get septicemia if he keeps sitting there, so he just wants Ugly Dave to sign so he can get out of there as soon as possible. As this happens, you see the back of the inspector, you see the front of Ugly Dave, and the inspector is trying to hand the clipboard and the pen to Dave. Dave then looks up and goes, "Oh, Otto, just in case you were wondering, and I didn't want to talk about it in the review about who Otto was, but Otto is the monster garbage dog / Pearly mix concoction." And he then proceeds to fire out the goo from its mouth, the same goo that basically pulled Pearly in. He then grabs the inspector and pulls the inspector into his mouth and totally ravages him, which is it's very gory. I'm just gonna warn you, if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor, put on your strong boots because it's quite rough. But in saying that, the lighter, once the Otto is busy swinging the inspector in the air, falls onto the floor, and Ugly Dave now has a lighter, which is, I think, if you think about it, it's a clawback to what he was saying. Everything he needs is there and somehow finds its way to there, so he has everything that he needs. So it's quite ironic that his lighter broke, this inspector rocked up, and the thing that he needed basically presented itself to him, so he's just kind of trusting in the dumpster to provide, kind of thing. So it ends up with him talking about his dumpster being his home. He's playing fetch with an appendage of what is left with the inspector, and him and Otto basically are living happy there, and he's saying that's the best home he's ever had. So yes, quite a weird one. I kind of liked it. You do get those type of people that pop into your life and you wish you had an Otto, so that part of it, cool. But as a whole, not my favorite Love, Death and Robots episode, but still pretty cool. I can see why I got a lower score than some of the other previous ones that I've reviewed. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed the episode of Love, this specific episode, The Dump of Love, Death and Robots, please do put that in the comment section. Regarding my review on it, if you enjoyed my review today, then please do also put that in the comment section. Some up and coming things. Ben's got a few plans in the pipeline which are exciting, which he has mentioned on his show yesterday, so if you haven't seen that and don't want to know what he's up to, please do go and watch that episode. But besides that, again, if you enjoyed today's episode, please show us some love by liking, sharing and subscribing. Other than that, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.